Welcome, Gena Rowlands. So, something that's interesting about Opening Night is that it features two very important elements of your career, acting on stage and acting on screen. And I was wondering what you see are the main distinctions for you between acting on stage and on screen.
Well, there are great advantages to both. On stage, you start at the beginning, go right through, which makes a lot of sense. And with movies, they shoot normally. We didn't, but normally you shoot wherever it's a financial thing. If there are going to be 6 scenes in the factory, you shoot all 6 of them until you've got them, and then you go back and then you go forth, so that you have to be really intensely concentrated to remember that. Because I remember Betty Davis was telling me, she said, I had to be so drunk in one scene, and then they cut, and I had to remember how drunk I was the day before, and she said it was really hard. And I could sympathize with it.
And was that a problem in this one, in the drunk scene?
Excuse me?
Was that a problem in this one for the drunk scenes?
No, we shot in continuity, so that we didn't have that problem. But no, the drunk scene did take a couple of days, but I figured I was drunk as a human being can be, so I just went ahead with it.
Okay, another thing is during a rehearsal scene in the film, your character says that she lost the reality, and I was wondering if you've ever felt you've lost the reality of a character in your performance.
Yes. When I was doing Middle of the Night with Edward G. Robinson, this was on stage in the 50s, I guess. And so there was a change of actor in one of the parts. And the change turned out to be a very good friend of mine. Unfortunately, it was a laughing friend of mine. And so because she just was going in for that thing, she'd say, you know, Betty, the trouble is, and I want to say with the children, you know, because I know the line, because I've been doing it for some months. And she'd start to giggle. And that would set me off, and I was not going to giggle. It was a serious scene, and I wasn't going to do it. But, so I said, maybe it's the children. And she said, yes, that's it. Well, that would set us off, both of us going, you know, in an entirely unsuitable situation. Finally, she was getting to laugh so hard, I knew that I wouldn't be able to resist much longer. And so I walked into a closet that was built on stage. It was a prop that you used and hung things on. And I walked in and shut the door and slapped myself in the face. And that kind of brought me to my senses, and I waited a minute, we went out and carried on. But I think that was a real loss of reality that I can't be proud of, but it's hard not to sometimes.
And then, have you ever faced a character that that you just didn't believe you could play, that you couldn't relate to?
No. I've had some characters that I didn't like as well. But they were very challenging because if you don't like someone, one thing about acting that is so wonderful is that you have to dig so deeply to find out what makes that person tick. Because everyone thinks what they're doing is right. There are very few people that are just plain evil and say, man, I'm just evil. They think they're right and other people are wrong. So you have to find out why they think they're right, what in their background made them think that. I've got my sunglasses on. And that gives you a greater understanding of a lot of people. Acting is movies, really. Movies really can change you in the audience. In understanding a character that you wouldn't normally even put up with, when you really understand them, you gain a lot of compassion. And I think, especially in a dark theater and surrounded by people, you just feel vibrations coming off of people. It's wonderful that way. But I have played characters that I didn't particularly like. And I made myself like them as much as possible. And then I realized that they very likely didn't like themselves very much either. So that it's kind of complicated but fun.
And do you think there's one character that has changed you more than any others?
Well, Woman Under the Influence was a very eye-opening part for me. And it was funny because a lot of people thought that must be how I am at home. And they would come up to me on the street and say, wasn't your fault if he didn't come home. He said he was going to come home, and he didn't. And I said, And so it was very interesting. And then opening night draws on so many things that I have done on stage and that all of us have, that I felt very comfortable with that. But all of them change you a little bit. You can't walk in their shoes, as the Indians say, that without gaining some understanding of it. And as the years go on, you've gained quite a lot of understanding.
There's another moment in opening night where your character says, when I was 18, I could play anything. My emotions were so close. I think another way of looking at it is when you're young, maybe your emotions are close, but maybe they lie more on the surface, and maybe sometimes they could lack some of the depth. As you've aged, how do you feel your emotions have changed the access to your performances?
Well, I do think that people are more emotional when they're young. Or they don't know how to hide it as well. And so they're very vulnerable to the moment, where they may just burst into tears, and where an older person could stop themselves from doing that. So when you're young and you have all of that emotion that girl in opening night had, and then as you get older, as my character did, you realize you don't have that quick grasp on emotion. It takes you longer to build up to it, and it's an acting problem.
Okay, now we'd like to open up for questions for the audience. So if you can just put up your hand and we will get a microphone to you, but please wait until you have the microphone to ask so we can hear.
Hi.
Hi.
I was just wondering, and when and how did you first meet Mr. Cassavetes, and what was the nature of your relationship, both both personally and professionally?
Well, I met him at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, and we saw each other for a couple of years, and we got married. I always admired the ferocity of his belief in ordinary people being interesting. And I just liked his way of thinking about it. We both got along that way very well. And he was at the time an actor. I had no idea he was going to become interested in directing. But he did. And while I was doing a play, the play I am speaking of before, Middle of the Night, he didn't have anything to do at night because he was working in live TV, and that's all in the daytime. And since live TV was so strange to everybody, actors, and it had so many rules, and it was hard, really. But everybody took it very seriously, and they adapted things from Faulkner and Hemingway and all kinds of very worthy writers. And so everyone wanted to do it, but they didn't really quite know what they were going to run into. And so since John had done so many of them, they asked if he would have a little class. Or it wasn't really a class, it was just a bunch of friends that came in and got asked questions about things that they wanted to know about. Out of that, though, came shadows, because they went into improvisation. They got kind of fascinated with that. And so they started making shadows, and I was still running because that play ran for 18 months. It was long. And so he had a lot of time on his hands, and then he got very, very interested in it, in directing. And he just sort of lost interest in acting himself, which I was a bit disappointed in because I think he was a wonderful actor. And I was sorry that he didn't do much more acting. We would act when we were doing our films. I mean, we would act for other people because we were paying for our films, and we'd run out of money all of the time. But we both had the advantage of having been professional actors for about 8 or 9 years before this happened, and so we had some place to go when we needed to get the money, and so we did that. But I while I was sorry to see him not act, and I wish he had done more, and I wish I had had a chance to do more with him acting. But I could see that it really, writing and directing really became the most important thing to him, and I was happy for him.
Excuse me. Ms. Rowlands, can you tell us what the origin of Opening Night is? I presume it's rooted to some degree in yours and Mr. Cassavetes' theater background.
For opening night, it was all of us were theater actors that were in that movie, and we all loved the theater. And it was an attempt to show too how not just the people on stage were responsible for it. I think the writer was the producer, and all of the people that do all the work backstage were just as intimately involved with the play as we were. And but it was from the experiences that we had on stage that we just wanted to do it. You know, we just thought it'd be fun, and so John wrote it. We did it.
Oh, hi, Ms. Rowlands. John Cassavetes' films have been extremely influential to a lot of people. They feel different to me from most other films. There's a real passion there and a rawness to them. I gather they were quite different to work on from other movies. Could you talk about what the different experience was working on a John Cassavetes film from any of the many other ones that you worked on?
Well, it was very different on John's set. In the first place, he was very strict about the actors not talking to one another about their character or what they were thinking of doing in a scene or not. He said, let it happen on film. Whatever you do, it's your part, it's your character. Things happen in life you never expect. He said, so just go on in, and whatever happens, happens sometimes. Not that we weren't following the script, but things do happen. I mean, you knock over a coffee cup, or you have to just keep playing. He never said cut. Also, he loved actors. He loved them. And that is not always true in other situations, on other films. Lots of directors just hate actors. If they could get hold of their necks, they would. But you get kind of used to that too. But the freedom is not even to be compared. There's no freedom really much on most films because it takes time, which costs money, and it just is easier to do them the other way. So that there really was a great deal of difference in attitude, and also we shot in sequence, which is expensive, but it makes a lot of difference when you're acting. And so there were a lot of little things like that. But mostly I think it was John wrote such scripts with the natural language. He didn't write, a lot of writers write a little too perfectly, and it gets a little stiff. And he wrote the way people on the street talk, and that was easy, very easy to do. Really, there was very, very little that was alike on conventional films and John's films. Though it didn't make it hard to go back and do those if you had to raise some money for your own. It's wonderful to feel loved, And all the actors felt loved because he did love them. He loved actors. And, you always do better at anything if somebody just loves everything you do. So I would say that's about it.
Okay, right over here.
Hello. You started talking a little bit about your process in sort of approaching a character. Could you talk a little bit more about that in terms of preparation? How do you prepare your characters?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
It was about your process and how you prepare your characters.
How I prepare the character?
Yeah.
I take script and I read it about 20 times without trying to make a judgment on my character. And then, of course, I come to my character where I'm paying more attention to that than the rest of the script. And you just start thinking about it. A great deal of acting is thinking about it. And you think of any experiences you've had in your own life that might relate to it, or anybody that you know that went through some of the problems, or you see total strangers doing things and you think, I wonder what they're thinking. You just try to get inside their heads. And pretty soon, things just start presenting themselves. I don't know, it's rather mysterious because you start seeing things and hearing things and watching people do things. And you just start understanding your character and the people around you a little bit, and then you personalize it and just keep working on it that way. And then you go into the scene with the other actors, and of course what they do affects you, and you affect them, and it's kind of mysterious, really, but it works.
Right down front here.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I hate to say two questions. How do you transform if you're working with another actor and you realize maybe they're just having a bad day? How can you transform that experience on stage or on film? Another take. And the other question is, you mentioned love. This movie we saw, to me, was faith, hope, and love. And which is the most powerful for you when you're working on a scene or in a movie or on stage? Thank you.
Tell me again.
Actually, can you repeat those? Or let's just do one, and then we'll pause and do the
What do
second
you do when you realize the actor you're playing with is having a bad day? Not much you can do about that. Wait till the next day and hope. There's nothing you can do about an actor who's having a bad day. Bad days just exist. And but then I didn't hear the last part of your question.
Well, I was going to ask, if we stick with that question, can you help them transform that moment? I saw, it felt like that in the movie we saw. There was lots of, whether the character was in character, out of character, it just felt good that maybe the other actor was helping to transform the moment so the audience would realize, oh, this was a brilliant piece of work, as opposed to, this guy's dying on stage here, let him die. I mean, there were some ideas of that in the movie too. But, so there was, how do you help the other actor transform, or have you had some experiences?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
It depends on what they're doing too. If they've forgotten their line, which is the usual thing that you come up against, because it's so easy to happen. But sometimes, that they have a very, very big scene coming up that is resting on this line. And so that's very hard to try to do, because you can't exactly say his line for him. And you always know it. If you're the other actor, you always know the other people's lines. But what you do is try to get it across what he was going to say in some way. You say, well, you're so smart, I suppose you think that blah, 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 you know? Or something like that, some little trick, because it doesn't take much for them to come back. And it's just something we all do for each other.
Hello, Ms. Rowland, and once again, thank you so much for being here. Simple question, what was your favorite role ever, and why?
Well, I think it was Woman Under the Influence. I'm not sure why, except that I had a hard time figuring her out. And when I did, I felt very close to her and her problems. And it's one of the first films that we made on our own, without the suits coming down, to the set. And I just felt liberated by the freedom that I was given. So I think of that almost as if it were my first film, though it wasn't. But it was. It was just something that I had never quite experienced before, and that I mostly did experience afterwards. And she was a little crazy, maybe that drew me to her too.
I have to ask you, you're such a credible drunk, and you're so everyone's so sympathetic at that moment. And how do you prepare for a scene like that?
Which scene are we speaking of?
Were you drunk in more than one scene? No, the one where you were very drunk.
The scene where you go on stage at the end when you're very drunk.
Oh, the drunk scene?
Yeah, how do you prepare for something like that, to look so credibly drunk?
Well, I told this yesterday, but it's true. I was at some occasion, I don't know what it was. I was talking to another actor, and this Japanese man came up, and I can't do a Japanese accent. I wish I could, because it's funnier in this case. And so he said, "Excuse me," he said, "You drunk in that scene?" I said, "You mean, was I playing drunk?" I said, "Yes." He said, "No, you really drunk in that scene." And I said, no, actually I wasn't. I was acting." And he said, and so I went back to speak to my friend, and he grabbed my arm. And he said, "You telling me you're not drunk in that scene?" I said, "Yes, I am telling you that." So he said, "Well, how do you know how to act drunk if you weren't drunk?" I said, research. You know. But a lot of people thought I was drunk in that scene, and you'd have killed yourself falling down those stairs and I mean, you had to be super sober. But so I didn't prepare for it. The script was drunk, and all of the scenes were drunk, and so I played drunk.
I was just wondering about John's influences. You mentioned about his desire to put real characters on screen. And he was working within like a script and a storyline and with actors. I was wondering, was he influenced at all on the documentary side by the films of Frederick Wiseman?
I don't know who his influences were, because I sort of got the impression he wasn't influenced by anybody. But he did admire a lot of people, and he did love documentaries. But I couldn't say just straight off who influenced him, except me.
Hello. I was wondering, when you were writing Courtier Latin for Paris Je t'aime, was there any parallel between that scene, that short film, and Myrtle and Marty's relationship in Opening Night? Do you want me to repeat it?
It's the scene in Paris Je t'aime.
Oh, Paris Je t'aime?
And is there a relationship, is there a similarity or an influence?
Parallel
between Ben's character
And mine?
and yours?
That was an easy thing to see examples of amongst my friends, different people where they get divorced and the guy goes for a younger woman, and the older woman always thinks, I mean, sometimes they make it up for a little while, but then comes again, and finally they just split. But the older woman always thinks that actually they'll spend their old age together. And I've seen that a lot. And so I just thought, well, what if that had been in my life? And I wrote it just with that in mind. And yet I could name on all 20 of my hands people who go through that very experience.
Okay, we'll do a couple more questions. If we sorry, right down here.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I was just wondering if there's any particular experience on any of John Cassavetes' sets that you are most memorable, or your favorite moment on any of his sets.
Well, you know Val Avery, the wonderful actor, in Minnie and Moskowitz. I don't know if you saw it, but he played the nightmare fixer-up. I mean, somebody fixed her up, encouraging her to go out. Blind date. And he is so awful and so funny that I thought it was one of the funniest moments I'd ever seen in film. And what was also funny was that Val and John had a relationship, because Val came in to every movie with a chip on his shoulder. And so John said, okay, go on and let's see what happens. And he said, look, don't push me. And John said, yeah, okay. He said, just get in there and do it. And Val said, you're going to make me do it? Well, the rest of the actors who didn't know Val were all shaken up by it. But he did it on every picture. And it would always wind up the same way. He said, you want to step outside? And John would say, yeah. And they'd step outside, and I think they went to a bar someplace and had a drink. And everybody's saying, well, is he coming back? What are we going to do about this scene? What is it? And I said, I just don't think you should worry about it. I think it'll happen. And sure enough, 10, 15 minutes later, they came in. Like, lots of things like that happened. And it wasn't a serious moment there. It was just a funny moment. But there are so many things that were funny. And serious, too. But that's the one that stands out to me.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to thank the audience for coming out this morning, and I'd especially like to thank Gena for spending time and sharing all these stories with us.
Thank you, and thank all of you for coming. It makes me very happy.